It's been fun
Is
taking
that
my
Minnesota FC or
Yep.
okay.
MUFC. Yep.
Yeah,
MNUFC.
yeah.
It is.
Is it Minnesota
Um,
United FC?
yeah.
I don't think you need both of those things.
Uh, it's a little redundant, you think, right?
Yeah. Well,
I
I mean,
know.
it's totally cool. I will say this for MUFC, best logo in all of MLS.
It's been voted on.
Oh,
And
really?
oh yeah. And
This is
now
an
we've got
official thing.
giant loon sculpture. Yeah, it's.
So clean. It's so
Yeah.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, well, is this happening? Are we in? Okay.
Yes, welcome to the hot seat, everybody.
Excuse our MLS talk while we come back to the real show, the real thing. So, welcome to the hot seat. For those of you that are new, I am your host, Ryan Watson, partner here at Upsource. Today, I am joined by a special guest, actually a couple special guests in the background. Try to keep them to a minimum, but I'm joined by a special guest, Grant. I'll have him introduce himself. Before we get to that, though, just some quick ground rules. It's a very casual, hopefully fun situation. We are here for the next 30 to 60 minutes, and we are at your disposal. We exist to answer questions. So you bring your questions to us, whether you're watching on LinkedIn or you're watching on YouTube. Let us know. You can ask questions about finance, about operations, about what strategy, agency strategy. You can ask us about what we're doing for Christmas. Anything is fair game, and we will lend our many years of agency experience to help answer those questions. So if you have them, you're going to go ahead and drop them in the LinkedIn comments, in the YouTube chat. I've got Caroline here. She is ready and waiting. She will be our MC. She's going to feed us those questions. So Caroline, did I forget anything? This is how it works, right? Nothing I missed. Great. Wonderful. Okay. So with that, today we have a very special guest joining us on the hot seat, here to lend his expertise, Grant of Parallax. Grant, hello. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. No, I really appreciate the invite. Yeah, I'm Grant Hultgren. I work at Parallax, which is a resource management tool. We help you forecast out beyond 3 to 6 months on your roles for professional service groups and agencies. But I twice implemented Parallax at two other organizations. One was a digital agency, one was a consultative agency. And I've been a COO for 10 to 12 years in there. I was a CFO for 1 year. And guess what? I learned I didn't like that. So I'm really glad Ryan's here. Those financial questions are the ones that I just
That's all right.
pass on, right?
CFO, COO, they're very intertwined, right? Especially
They
at
are, they
smaller,
are. In that Venn diagram, though, I'd punt over the
leaned
fence every day. Oh yeah.
ops. Totally. Cool. Okay, so that is that gives you a sense for the sphere of expertise that Grant can offer your questions. So while folks are getting their thoughts gathered, their questions formulated, Caroline, I know we've gotten a few over the transom since the last meeting. So why don't you start us with one or two questions? While you do that, by the way, I'm going to close my door, but I can hear you. So go ahead.
Awesome. So our first question is, how do you prevent scope creep and keep everyone aligned on what's actually included?
Okay, how do you prevent scope creep? So Grant, do you want to start or do you want me to start? I think this is a good.
I'm happy to start. I
Yeah.
think if you're talking about a scope and keeping everybody aligned, what is it that we're aligning on? I mean, starting with a proper, well-defined scope is how you begin to understand what sandbox you're playing in and where those walls are. And I think as any group, right, if you're going out and starting your own agency as a solo entrepreneur, or you're a part of an agency that's growing and you're looking at adding additional services, there's growth and some pains along the way that you learn there, right? You learn that vernacular really matters. For me, on the digital realm, learning our different code bases and the tools that we be building in obviously literally impacted how that got sold and how that got translated into delivery and by a client. And so there's pieces you learn along the way. Some scopes are maintenance and retainer based, very open, right? So you're just tracking against those hours. Those are going to be your easier ones. When you get more technical or you get more fixed bid based, that's where you really want to be monitoring and making sure that there's alignment. So I'd start with how you write that scope, and then it's how you track and what those metrics are along the way. And it can be as simple as tracking hours, right? Could be just looking at monthly costs and what those hours are going to be. but also it could be using a project management tool to make sure you've got your tasks all built out and how those are all aligning. I think that's kind of at a high level where I'd
Yeah.
start, but yeah, I mean, you're constantly fighting scope creep, right?
Well, isn't that right? Yeah. Well, welcome to running an agency. Isn't
Yeah.
this the whole business, right? Like this is the difference between agencies that make a profit and those that don't. I mean, first of all, I agree with everything that you said, Grant. Like obviously, especially the idea of defining like how you can't manage scope creep if you don't have a defined scope to begin with. And quite frankly, that's where a lot of agencies fall down right out of the gate. I think, and then obviously your point about like figuring out kind of a way to track against that defined scope so that we have some form of a feedback loop. I think a couple other things that I would add. So obviously we have to define the scope, and then we have to communicate the scope both back to the client, also internally. I feel like we do a lot of project profitability exercises. Obviously, Parallax lives very clearly in this world, and one of the primary causes of missed project margins is simply a communication problem. Like the person who's selling the project has a different idea or perspective of the scope from the folks who are executing against the scope, and some of that is just poor communication, whether we didn't define it adequately in the docs or whatever that looks like. And then obviously, like with regard to the client, it's alignment, right? So I communicate to the client, this is the scope. Are we aligned on what the scope is, right? And that alignment happens explicitly. It happens explicitly. This is what I understand the scope to be. Are we aligned, right? We lost Caroline for a hot second, but she's coming back. I think she slacked me. She's got a, I don't know. She's rebooting her computer. Anyway, so back to the question. So definition, communication, aligned it. And then the other thing, like I'd be interested in your perspective on this. Like I think the thing that we don't, a cause of scope creep that I don't think that we talk about a lot is that I think part of the reason is that it's like it requires a conversation we don't want to have.
Yeah.
Like it's a tough conversation, right? It is a lot easier to just as a person. And by the way, the people who are defending your scope are individual contributors who are likely somewhat junior and may not feel empowered or comfortable or confident enough to say to a client, hey, what you're asking for is not in the scope. It is a lot easier for them to just do it.
Yep.
And that's why they do it, because it's uncomfortable. It's hard.
In
And
that
so
moment.
like,
Yep.
yeah, right? Like, and so, we have this value at Upsourced, which we call moose on the table. And basically it just means like there's something going on. It feels uncomfortable. There's a moose walking around in the room. I'm going to pick up the moose. I'm going to put it on the table and we're going to talk about it. We're going to say, hey, look, it's a moose. Let's talk about it. Right. And that's, that is a little bit required in situations where your client is asking for a thing that they might know is out of scope. You feel is out of scope. It's a hard conversation to have, but the only way to defend against scope creep is to call it out, is to have the conversation, right?
Yeah.
Let me ask you, A, do you agree with that? And B, Grant, do you, what are some ways that you've found success training more junior members of your ops team to have difficult scope related conversation?
Yeah, I do agree with it because I think it is really the economics of the situation, right? Where we all want to be people pleasers, right? We want people to walk away from a meeting feeling like, oh, they're getting the value that they're looking for. And, oftentimes it's like, oh man, if you could just do this, right? If you could
Yeah.
just, I know I said I approved that last time, but actually I need this edit now, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
it's that slippery slope that I think you're getting at. So to me, it's about there's kind of a couple different pieces that I've kind of learned is one is within our projects in and of themselves, we actually told our project management team after kind of giving them a little more financial literacy on it. So what gross margin is in particular, right? And so when you kind of
Yeah,
look at it and
totally.
like, listen, you're in charge of this project's financial well-being, right? And that doesn't mean that you control all aspects of it, but you are accountable for it, and you're the one that's sort of the canary in the coal mine. And I will never get upset at you if you come to me and say, I think we're burning hot, right? Can you help
Yeah.
me kind of sort that out? Because I want to know that as soon as possible. I think that goes to the communication element that you're saying is like, do we have that ability to try to have those touch points earlier rather than at the end of a project where you're like, wow, that was a lot of scope creep, right? I wish
Yeah.
I would have realized that sooner. The best time to talk about scope creep is as soon as you catch it, right?
Yep.
So I think there's
Totally.
that aspect, but that takes a little bit of training. And I
Yeah.
just believe in also educating and helping those individual contributors because they want that accountability. They want that
Yeah.
growth. And I
Yeah.
just, I don't know. I've worked with teams that have embraced that. The other part of it though, too, is I told them is like, you can go 10% over budget, right, on yours.
Yeah.
And, but make it surprise and delights. Make it really cool stuff. Like
Yeah.
give
Yeah.
them,
Yeah.
and if it is a little scope element that's like, that's kind of scope creep, like, okay, I trust you. But then you own that and you make sure that the customer knows the value that they're getting for that. And,
Yeah.
and that just came from the organizations I was with, right? Where we would have these long running relationships with organizations. And that was just part of it. They didn't want to feel nickel and dime sometimes. And we wanted to avoid that. But we also
Yeah.
knew that we had a threshold that we really had to maintain. And
Yeah.
I wanted my team to feel empowered to have those conversations. Lastly, when it got bad, I mean, as a leader, I'm happy to be bad cop, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Going to
Totally.
be the one that comes in and is like, you know what, that is scope creep. This is what it's going to cost us. And then the PM to say, oh, like, but it would really make the project better. Maybe we can go 75-30 on it, right? And
Yeah.
then
Yeah. Yeah.
I get to be the one that really creates a beneficial relationship and problem solving while I
Yep.
kind of look like the guy who's, just checking the ledger sort of thing. And I think sometimes you need that good cop, bad cop to
Yeah.
kind of
I I
relationships.
agree. And also like I think a thing that you said that I just want to like double underline that I think is really important is like all of these things, the determination for whether the PM should be the bad cop or you should come in and be the bad cop or we're just going to give them the surprise and the delight. They all are the prerequisite to being able to make all those decisions is for everybody to be on the same page about what the expectation is and where we are. Like I mean, and I'm telling you something, when I think about, we've got 120 marketing agencies and I think about clients that come to us, many of them are not doing any form of project profit, right? Like they're not measuring their ongoing project profit, but even the ones that aren't necessarily enrolling the organization in that exercise, right?
Yep.
They're treating it as like a postmortem thing that they do as owners to evaluate their own profit and not an exercise that everybody owns, right? Where it's, hey, this person, you're working on this. Let me let you in on what our expectations are for profit. Let me let you in on what we expect this to look like. And let me let you in on like my tolerance threshold. And when we exceed the tolerance, this is when I need you to kind of bring me in. And so anyway, empowering folks to be able to kind of manage and own and at least track towards a margin, important.
Yeah, I think
So
a lot of
yeah,
yeah, I mean to your point though, like for me, the point where I really realized it was important was it's not like every project was going over, right? It's not like everyone was a bad apple or a bad actor.
no,
They're all trying to get as much value out of this limited scope as possible. But it came down to like usually 2 to 3 projects where you're
of
like,
course.
oh man,
Yeah.
like if we had just caught those earlier, we would have had far better profitability for our organization. And you can see our sunk cost on them, right? Like,
Yeah, it's 80 for
and
20.
yes,
80% of the
exactly.
loss is coming from 20% of the clients. It's just like that rule. It's just how it works. So
Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. All right. Caroline is back. Caroline is back. Caroline, is she back? Caroline's
I
back.
am back.
Okay, great. So Caroline, I think we got that last question surrounded. I know you mentioned we were having some challenges with LinkedIn. YouTube is going strong either way. What else? What's next? Hit us
Yes,
with the
I
next question.
apologize for some technical difficulties. The original link on LinkedIn wasn't working, but we have a new one up and running.
It's going.
We'll give you guys the playback
LinkedIn
recording.
Live is a
All
trick. It's
done.
a tricky animal. That's okay.
Yes. So this next one was actually for Grant.
Okay.
So you were the CEO for agencies and now you work with a tech company that serves agencies. How are you all thinking about AI and where do you think the opportunities exist for agencies?
Oh man.
Oh boy.
I did
Tell you
yeah.
what a
But yeah.
loaded
How much time we got?
yeah, just clear
Uh,
your afternoons.
yeah, ready for this? And then do you want optimistic or like dark mode here? No,
I don't know. Yeah, right. Well, I guess I want just what's in Grant's heart.
yeah, yeah. So it's fun. I had a conversation around this, in particular around project management tools,
Yeah,
where
okay.
how AI is impacting there. So one, I do try to approach the AI conversation optimistically. Again, I try to approach it in the sense of how are we going to make our teams more talented and better? And I think there is low hanging fruit on the administrative side of things, frankly. And you're seeing that more and more with agenics primarily, so AI agents that can go out and kind of make some of these decisions, but it's
Yeah.
not making decisions around scope, for example, right? That's a
Right.
really big piece where you're defining value of your team and who's going to work on, but it might help you understand some of those roles. It might understand the project plan for that scope and make that more, quickly adaptable or amenable to that customer situation. So I think, when I see AI, yes, of course, there's the large language models and all the content, and I play with those. I was playing with Claude and I built out a revenue leverage calculator for a year.
Ooh.
So like if you want to up your billable percentage, right? You're
Yeah.
gonna, and I'm wondering how many headcount I need to hire. Do I make my team more billable or do I up my rate? Well, maybe I'm pulling all three levers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But that's a lot of change. But I just actually want to forecast my headcount. And I work
Yeah.
with an awesome CFO here who helped just build this awesome spreadsheet. But it's like, could I build a little application? So that was my test. And so
Yeah.
I'm seeing more and more stuff like that that just makes coding more
Yeah.
accessible, as well as I think we will see some elements, and even internally here, this is where we're thinking about resource management. What are those overhead administrative tasks for these organizations that we can just reduce the friction? I think that's where technology needs to live. I think that's where AI is going to come in. It's
Yeah.
not going to be create my creative campaign because we can all spot that and we all kind of
Totally.
it,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
it may get there soon. I don't know. But like for me, it's about reducing friction. It's probably about integrations and integrations for data in particular and how those
Yeah.
work. But yeah, I mean, Ryan, I'm kind of curious too. Like, what have you been seeing
Well,
or hearing?
I mean, it's a funny time for this. I'm in my AI era right now. As of this week. I mean, it's funny. Like I have not spent a lot of time trying to leverage AI tools for a variety of reasons that aren't worth going into today. But I decided in the last like 7 days that I'm like, okay, I got to stop with this bias. I'm just gonna like really spend some time on all the models. I mean, all in air quotes,
Yeah.
but many of the models, and just take some use cases and try to try to automate some things, try to add some value, just see like what do I think is possible, and just spend all day thinking, okay, where could this help? And I feel like I left being both more surprised and impressed, and also less um well let's say less convinced of like AI's ability to replace any single person for any given thing, right? Like I felt like we are so much closer than I thought, and also so much further away than I thought. That's the best way for me to describe it, right? So again, like I really, really impressed by the ability to quickly create like a custom GPT and send it some training data. Like a good example is, we have this like what we call the anatomy of a great presentation, right? We do client financial strategy, and we have this way of presenting monthly meetings that's more about storytelling and less about what I call reading the news, right? Where it's like anybody can read a financial statement. Then nobody's paying us to do that. They want a story. They want a narrative. What should I do next? What should I care about? That kind of stuff. And so we've done a lot of like internal trainings to say like, this is what constitutes a good storytelling presentation. And this is what reading the news. And so I fed it a bunch of videos, examples. I scored the videos like this one's good. The videos of client meetings that either I'm on or one of our teams, fed it all those scores and said, okay, here's a new one you haven't seen. Give it a score. Wow. I mean, it does such a good job in like 5 seconds reading the whole transcript. Wow, what a cool application of large language models. But then I've been trying to like automate full work streams. Like when this happens, do this, do this, do this, apply AI, do this. And you realize how many what seem like insignificant transformations that we're doing with our brain, with our mechanics and whatever. And every time I tried to say like from start to finish, let me just use AI to automate a workflow, absolutely impossible to do because of this, because of that, because of this. And all those little gaps are gonna take a long ass time to fill, because again, data is just not it's not uniform. There's so many little data transformations that we make. And so again, it's like, but in each individual use case, at each individual step, man, am I impressed by the ability for AI to augment what I was going to do. And I also think like, one of the things that I do think is like a thing that I've started to glom onto is like, do I necessarily think, an AI agent is necessarily going to come in and replace the, the financial advisory that we provide? No, certainly not. But do I think that we can use, like, do I now have a greater degree of confidence in my ability to train an AI model on what I think about a bunch of tools and use that to make my team better at answering questions? Yeah, we can do that today.
Yeah.
Wow. And so anyway, yeah, like that doesn't necessarily speak to this agency question necessarily, but overall, like, I'm impressed by the power of what it can do in each individual use case. I'm not worried about a workforce of AI agents in the immediate to medium term.
Well, and I think even to your point, I mean, regardless of whether it's financial services in the work that you're doing or an agency, like that narrative, you're talking to humans, right? There's this human
Exactly.
element and there's a trust component to that. And I
Yep.
mean, you can go and I was on this talk and someone said, "Oh, I just asked ChatGPT like, why we can't trust ChatGPT?" And it's like, well, I can't be empath. It says I can't be
Yeah.
empathetic. I can't give you a hug, right? I can't. And like
Yeah.
that's why we are in this. I mean, that's why I'm at Parallax. I love our team, but I love our customers because they're doing this for the people within their organizations. And that doesn't mean everything's all roses. Sometimes it's some
Yeah.
hard decisions along the way, but that's what they're in for. And I've really enjoyed that component. And I think that's the way or the lens that at least I'm applying to AI, where it's like, I'm not here to replace humans. I
Yeah.
would love to make their experience better. I would love to
Yeah.
highlight the skill sets that they love to do. I think
Yeah.
as a COO, like AI agents could replace a good chunk of what I did in
Yeah.
terms of financial forecasting, right? And giving
Sure.
me those models. But at the end of the day, that decision's still going to be relied on for me. I can't say AI
Well,
made that decision, right? Like that's not how this works.
I mean, also like take a really classic example and maybe I'm unique here, but for instance, like there's a couple note takers on this call. Like everybody's got AI note takers now. Everybody's, doing that, right? And so then we all get transcripts of AI notes and our clients will get transcripts of AI notes coming out of meetings. And that's not a thing that clients are thinking, oh, this is really valuable. Thanks for doing this. I'm glad you're on top of. But when we physically follow up from the meeting with a summary of what happened and then the takeaways, it's like, thank God you guys are so on it. I
Yeah.
could literally say the exact same thing the AI did,
Yep.
but it means something different
Yep.
because we're looking for a different, we're not looking for the data only. We're
Yep.
looking for what the data is meant to make us feel. And it's really hard for us to get that from robots today. Again, maybe we all evolve as species and we're totally comfortable with that. But to your point, like we're looking for people's empathy and trust. And I'm looking for sleep at night factor. And I want to know that like you are looking me in the eye and telling me that this is what you need to do for your business. And that means more to me than a spit out from ChatGPT, even if you're
Yep.
saying the same things.
Yep.
So anyway,
I think we covered it.
I think we got it. Okay. Carolyn.
Awesome. So our next question is, are there any tips for forecasting agency revenue when there are so many moving parts?
Oh, you start this one, Ryan.
I'll start, but no cop out. You've been doing this. You know how to do this. You got it. But okay, yes, I can start. Well, so first of all, I think it depends a great deal on how you earn revenue and like what the revenue streams are like, right? So like if you are a predominantly retainer-based recurring revenue model social media agency, forecasting revenue is going to look a lot different for you than if you're a WordPress website building agency and it's all project based and whatever, right? So I think that's the first question. In a ideal world, some amount of your revenue next year, 2025, I'm just going to assume that I'm forecasting revenue for next year. In an ideal world, some amount of your revenue next year is going to be coming from existing sources, right? Customers that I have worked with Doesn't mean those are retainers necessarily. It could just be large clients that I have a sort of an annuity stream of projects from, right? Land and expand type thing. But either way, some amount of my revenue is going to come from customers that I already know, and some amount of my revenue is going to come from new logos that I need to go win, right? Subset of that new revenue. Some of that's in my pipeline and some of it is not, right? So those are kind of like the sources of where my revenue is going to come from. By the way, and we've talked about this before, like, I have a bias where I believe if less than 50% of your revenue next year is coming from existing sources, you have a bit of a problem to solve. I believe you're probably on a hamster wheel. That doesn't mean like we don't have plenty of clients who are branding agencies for middle market clients, right? Who, are just going to do like $150,000 rebrand projects, but the clients they work with are only ever going to buy one project for them every decade. And so 100% of their revenue is just coming from new wins every quarter. You could build an agency that way, but man, that is a very stressful way to live. So anyway, like generally speaking, it's my hope that at least 50% of your revenue is coming from existing sources. And quite frankly, in an ideal world, it's like 70, 80+%. So if I've got that, right, if that's true, then I need to go through like an account planning exercise, right? I need to go through my existing accounts. And in addition to forecasting revenue, of course, I want to understand like the business and the opportunities and the stakeholders and, what my plan is for that year. But as part of all of that, I need to understand like what my opportunities look like and have some estimate on what amount of revenue I can earn from those existing sources, right? If it's a retainer, it's a kind of a renewal percentage. And if it's additional projects, then it's a little bit more nuanced and strategic. It's the same idea, right? So what kind of revenue can I get bottoms up, brick by brick, client by client? How much revenue can I get from existing sources? And then I have new revenue. New revenue, I'm going to look to like, okay, well, I've got a pipeline, so I can be a little bit mathematical about those. And then the sort of like I've got to go get number. There's all sorts of like very mathematical sort of fancy ways that you can estimate that sort of go get number. Most of the time, it's just going to result in something wildly inaccurate. It's just very hard to predict, especially in agencies. It's like very hard to predict how much new revenue I'm going to go create. I would say, of course, we should use history as best we can. I think the only thing I would say here is just beware of the trap of like exponentiality. I think a lot of folks, when they're assuming like their go get number, they're like, well, I did $1 million in new business last year, so I think I can grow that by 20% this year. Okay, but like, why, right? Like what is happening different? It's not going to just naturally stack on itself. If you're going to go do the same things next year, you're probably going to get the same outcomes. You might even get worse outcomes as like your channels start to degrade. So just be careful. In all likelihood, new business is going to look a lot more linear than it is going to look exponential. So a person can go get $1 million in revenue unless they're doing dramatically different things. It's probably just going to still be $1 million. So anyway, overall, bottoms up, divide your revenue sources. And hopefully a big chunk of that is coming from an account planning exercise that you should have already been doing anyway. Okay. That's my 90-second tutorial on how I would forecast revenue. What would you add, edit, delete, Grant?
I would add, but what I would say along with that proportion of from existing versus new, look at your portfolio, eggs in a basket, right?
Yeah,
If
sure.
looking at your existing and you've got 80% coming from one customer, ooh, that's a big risk.
That's also a
They
big
might be
problem.
the cash cow, and that's great. We don't want to upset that cart. But let's start looking at some of those other pillars we can come in and play so that you can build that existing revenue or those existing relationships and balance that out. And we had competitors go out of business. Big customer would leave and you don't have the cash flow anymore to support what you've built. And that's tough to see. And so that's just something that I call out whenever we're looking at revenue. And I think the other part of it is exactly what you're getting is make a plan. I think we all want to grow. We all want to grow by 20, 30%. Some of us want to grow by 50%, but substantiate it.
Yeah,
Exactly. Sometimes it is like, it's almost like t-shirt size. Like when I think of development, I'm not a sales guy, but like sales operations exist for a reason. Like what are our minnows? What are our fish? What are our whales? Let's have a targeted strategy to go about that with reason and responsibilities. And that was something as a CEO I could manage. And I could say, okay, it is wildly unpredictable. And yet we could also go with it at a plan to say, this is what we think is going to work. Oh man, that didn't work. Let's stop doing that. And let's try this route, right?
Yeah.
Find targeted customers or clients as well where's your niche? You're obviously successful in some areas, so
Yeah.
replicate. Don't build new when you can just keep the same processes, even the same talent, because that reduces your overhead in the long term, and it helps you not learn expensive lessons along the way. So, those aren't necessarily so much revenue forecasting, but it's just trying to make that grind not as much of a grind, I guess, because it's hard to grow. It is
Well,
a
totally.
challenge.
Well, and no, but I think your point is actually really good. And what I would say on that is like, again, especially new revenue, like your new revenue, I mean, the whole thing, but especially new revenue, like, yeah, okay, we're going to create a forecast. And the one thing we know is it's probably going to be wrong. But it exists to do so much more than just predict the future, right? It's a management tool. So to your point,
Yeah.
like, if I think I'm going to do $1 million in new revenue, how? What is that going to look like? Am I going to do, is that predicated on the idea that I'm going to go get one deal from a 7-figure client?
Yep.
Or is that predicated on the idea that I'm going to go get like a $500,000 and five? Like, what does that look like? And also, okay, great. If my whole plan is I'm going to go get $1 million client, which crazy standard deviation on those outcomes, but like, okay, so what is that going to take? And we know that I'm going to be wrong, either for better or for worse. I'm going to be wrong, but I can then look and see I was wrong. How?
Yeah.
Right? Was I wrong because I was right? I was going to go get one of these deals, but $1 million, just like we don't have the value to substantiate those kinds of prices. It ended up being 250, or I found these opportunities. I found $3 million whales, but man, I dramatically underestimated the sales cycle it would take to go get one of those. And so, like, whatever, right? I'm going to learn a lot that's going to help me improve my business going forward. And that's the goal, not necessarily to be right, but to optimize to, your growth tactics for the following year.
Yeah.
Cool. Good. Great. All right. So time check. I see we're at like the 32-minute mark. So I suspect we've got room for one more good one if you've got one in there. I have faith in this crew. I suspect we've got a
Okay,
good
so
one.
I actually have two. So we'll do this first one just to stay on this
Lightning
revenue
round?
chat. Is there a
Right.
number where you recommend agencies start applying more focus to profit percentage instead of revenue, or is it more individualized than that?
All right. So let me repeat this back. You're saying, is there a size or like a mark where you would start to worry more about the profitability or the profit percentage of an agency versus just their total revenue?
Correct.
Okay. I have I have strong, I mean, I'll start. I have strong
Yeah.
opinions, of course, but Grant, you tell me. I mean, first of all, I don't think I would ever completely ignore profit, right? Like ultimately, even if I'm, just starting out, if I'm delivering an unprofitable solution, I'm going to be out of business relatively soon.
Yeah.
But what I would say, here's my take. This is, we have this framework. I don't know if you've heard us talk about this before, Grant, but you can react to whether you agree with it or disagree with this. We have this framework where we talk about the life cycle of agencies and kind of what problems exist and what the goal is at each stage. And so, this question makes me think of the create mode stage, this is what we call like 0 to 1, right? 0 to 1 philosophically, and also 0 to 1 literally, $0 in revenue to $1 million in revenue. And I believe that in the 0 to 1 stage, your whole goal is to exit the create mode stage, like to get to $1 million in revenue or more, so that you can actually be an agency that ultimately can become profitable, sustainable, repeatable. In the 0 to 1, I'm personally way less concerned about the individualized profitability of your agency than I am in your ability to figure out sales and service. Like, can
Yep.
I find people who want to buy this thing I think should exist? And can I service it in a sort of repeatable way, in a way that like delivers great service and gets me new clients? I cannot do that unprofitably because, again, if I do that unprofitably, I won't get to the $1 million, right? I'll just burn cash. But, if I get there at 40% gross margins versus 50, like, am I going to lose a lot of sleep? Personally, no. I have gone on record, and this may be right or wrong, but I believe there are very few problems that you will create in create mode that we can't solve for you in build mode. If you come to me at $1 million in revenue and you've got a 35% gross margin, I can fix that for you.
Yep.
But what I can't fix for you is the fact that you never got to $1 million in revenue. And because I can't help you figure out what your product should be and how you actually like deliver it to market. And so that's my overall like take. Like there is a point where it's like you just need to create a business that should exist in the world, whether that's 1 million or 700,000 or 1.2. I don't know. It doesn't really matter. But like you got to create a business that should exist in the world. And then we work you through what we call the hierarchy of financial needs, where we can create, like I said, a profitable, sustainable, repeatable business. So that's I think how I would answer the question. I don't know. What do you think about that, Grant? How would you answer this question?
I agree, right? Because what we're essentially saying in the create stage is that you're creating value, right? Which is revenue, right? It's not about efficiency, which is margin. It's not about how well you're delivering against that, because in creating, you're not always going to be efficient, right? And that's okay.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't think about it in terms of if there's like a head count or a revenue figure. I think you've probably seen some more of that than I have. When I was at a digital agency, I was the second hire, and thinking back on that, it's a while back, but it's like, oh yeah, we're in survival mode. It was do anything to get that dollar and to get that invoice paid and to show. And it's like, I think the stakes are also lower, right? There's just not as many people involved. You probably have contractors. It's not full-time hires, and like that doesn't mean you want to fail, but like the problems just aren't as big at that point. And all right, I think that speaks to what you're saying. It's like you can fix all that in the moment. You're trying to demonstrate that, deliver, and you've got value in the marketplace. As soon as you get to that, and that is the luxury, frankly, of being able to hire a COO. Right. The luxury of hiring a COO is you've demonstrated that value. You now have determined there's a process that you can repeat, and you're looking for that individual to come in and say, oh, well, I'm a really good ops person, and I'm not going to add value from a revenue standpoint. I'm actually going to increase your margin by 5 to 10%. Right. That is what a good COO will come in to do with a good CFO. Right. And they will operationalize and help your delivery. But that is, like, I fully admit, as a COO, that is a luxury role, because you have proven yourself as an organization first and foremost. And
that's exactly right.
You've earned the right to have that.
Exactly.
I totally agree.
And by the way, like you just kind of, as a nature of these create mode agencies, you are likely to service with more contractors who are more expensive on a per hour basis. And we can replace that with a full-time staff once we get to the point where, we have more repeatable revenue. I will say, I just have to share this one thing. This question now reminds me of this. Every now and then I like on LinkedIn and I see somebody make a comment that I think I'm going to respond to this. This is asinine. And then of course I realize I'm not going to respond to this. There's no upside for me. Here I am responding to this. There was somebody, and they were talking about building an accounting firm, but they were like, I'm launching an accounting firm. I haven't launched yet, but I've spent the last like 1 month like automating all my workflows so that like when a lead capture comes in, they go to this thing and then they get dropped into this thing and they go to this thing. And, and then I'm going to spend the next month doing this set of automations so I can do this and this and this and this, because, a successful business can't scale unless it has like this solid foundation or whatever. And I view that kind of whole thing about efficiency and profitability. And I'm reading this and I'm like, this is a waste of time. You don't have any clients. You got all the time in the world to take a lead. What a joy that would be, that you have to spend an hour manually moving go get a lead. That's hard.
Yes.
That's the hard part. What is wrong with you? And so again, like, hey, in create mode, forget about all that other shit, like all the efficiencies. Your job is to sell. 80% of your job. Go find business. And then when you get business, deliver it and do it again and do it again. And then you just might have the privilege of owning a business and not a job. And once you own a business, we will make that business work for you. But do not prematurely optimize for all this other stuff. Sorry, I'm off my soapbox. But people love that.
Honestly, I think it's the same trap you fall into, even mature agencies, of having to scale or change their service. I mean, we're talking about AI, right? Like, like you have to get on the mindset of like, you're not going to have margins on your new offerings that you're going to market with. And sometimes I think there is that safety blanket when you get into an agency. They're like, oh, change is hard. We don't have the same margin. Well, of course you're not. You're in the create mode again. That is the sustainability of your organization. And it's less dire at that stage, but it's a tough trap to fall into, because you're right. Like, we got to be there selling. That is the hardest part
Oh,
of this role.
it
And
is.
like I said, I'm not in the sales side, but like I was there every sales meeting I could be at. One, because it goes back to the scope question. If I could be there, I could understand how they're scoping
You could
it.
understand exactly.
But
Yep.
also, I was just trying to lend anything I could to get those deals across the line because challenge all the time.
Yep. Totally. All right. Last
There,
one. I'm going to
yeah,
be
second question, Carolyn.
uncharacteristically brief in this next one. I'll let Grant take it first.
Yeah,
Assuming
so this question is,
Grant's
how
there.
do you manage cash flow when project timelines and payments are all over the place?
Well, go
I mean,
ahead.
cash flow is financials,
I,
so yeah, you
I
feel.
know, I know. Here I is. Well, here I'll provide something brief, and then feel free, Grant, to
Yeah.
add on, since I know you. Okay. Um, well, I mean, look, to some degree, if you are a sort of project-based organization, you are going to have peaks and valleys in cash. Like that's just kind of endemic to project-based organizations. So there's a couple of things that I would recommend that you do. I mean, there's 1,000 things you could do, but like here's the few things that come directly off the dome. First of which is like, first of all, we need to have cash reserves to sustain ourselves through the peaks and valleys of cash, right? So we recommend having at least 3 months of fixed monthly operating expenses sitting in cash reserves that I can draw upon as I'm waiting on invoices to go out the door. The other thing that can also smooth out cash needs is a line of credit. We recommend every one of our clients get a line of credit that it just extends. It's a backstop on a backstop. Just to be clear, we do not recommend using a line of credit to fund unprofitable agency operations. Like I don't have enough revenue to pay for my staff. They're sitting around, but I don't want to lay anybody off just because. So I'll just go into personal debt to do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. But it is very nice. Like, I have an invoice. It's, 120-day payment terms because it's PNG and I need that money now. That's a perfect use case for drawing on a line of credit, right? And then, I think the other thing that I would do is I would take my invoicing schema very seriously, right? So like I wouldn't do any work that I don't get at least a good chunk of it up front. Like I'll give you an example. At the agency that I ran, and we worked with large Fortune 500. I mean, P&G was a customer among others. I would say and we ran media campaigns, which are famously, through agencies, often like, you do the work, you bill at the end of the month, you get whatever. We billed upfront. That was our default payment terms. We invoice upfront, 30 days at time of execution of the SOW, and about 80% of the time we were able to get that. And that helped a great deal. So I would say like absolutely front load your default payment terms. Like we're going to invoice upfront, at least a big chunk, if not all of it. 30 days is our terms. Again, some people are going to have a problem with that. Others aren't going to push back at all. Another thing that I would recommend doing is, to the extent you can, create automated payment collection. So like obviously if it's a retainer, there's no reason that shouldn't be a recurring ACH, but even project-based work, you can get ACH authorizations and your clients enable you to go pull that money. Is every client going to be cool with that? Of course not. Are some of your clients going to be cool with that? Yes. And that obviously helps, speed up collections as well. So those are there's a couple easy ones. I don't know. Any other ideas that I didn't think
Oh, I,
about?
I think you hit on it, right? I think when we talk about cash flow, we often don't talk about the things we control in that, which is our
Yep.
outgoing cash, our expenses, and just being a good steward of what that overhead is that we're carrying and when those occur, right? And against our balance. Now, the things we don't control with cash coming in is, are they going to pay late or anything like that? Again, what I learned, I mean, you mentioned P&G, but like those MSAs and those governance components of it, negotiate them. You will
Yeah.
never get them if you don't ask.
Yeah.
Oftentimes there's programs, and like I have a sense that we're talking to like small to mid-sized agencies here. Go in and play that card, right? Like tell them,
Yeah.
and you will find a way. If you go to procurement, though, procurement's job is to save them money.
A
So if
thousand
you
percent.
go in there without a plan, without a stakeholder who's saying this business is really important and therefore we are going to not abide by procurement's rules, guess what? Bring that stakeholder who's buying your services because they will tell procurement what needs to happen, and that is the best route to go. Bring an ally.
Yeah, totally.
That was something I learned because, yeah, when you're getting 90 to 120-day payment terms as a small business, it is hard.
It's
But don't
impossible.
accept it. Fight it and go in
Totally.
and explain why. I think that's the biggest thing. That's sort of almost like along the lines of the scope conversation. It's a hard conversation to have. No one wants
Yeah.
to compromise a deal because of that, but trust me, like everyone gets it. You're a smaller
Yeah.
business to these Fortune 500s. Use that to your advantage when you can.
I
Yeah, but I think we hit it.
I totally agree. I mean, I totally agree with everything that you're saying. I'd say like if you can't like to your point, you absolutely can negotiate your payment terms and they do it all the time. Like, so the standard terms for P&G are 120 days. We had 15-day terms. We didn't give anything for that. We just got it, right?
Yes.
We did what you suggested. There will be times where you hit a roadblock for whatever reason. You don't have the leverage or whatever, but you have to remember again, the most important lesson in like any business arrangement is just like the this is not you're not dealing with a machine. You're dealing with a human being. Her name's Sally. She works in procurement. Sally gets an annual review every year. Sally's annual review is a function of the things she can point to, right?
Exactly.
If you give Sally, so if Sally's not going to give you 30 days when she needs 90, Sally is not her life will not change whether it's 30 or 90. She does not give a shit, okay? But what Sally does care about is Sally can point to a thing she negotiated and got on behalf of the company. And so if you give up 0.5% or some obnoxiously small, Sally doesn't care what the percentage is. It could be 5%, it could be 0.5%. Sally makes the same amount of money either way. But Sally can put on her performance review, I negotiated preferential discounts for this client at whatever, right? And so you just have to realize like what motivates human beings are on the other side of all these things. And it doesn't take much to get somebody to move off their position. You just have to understand like what is motivating them? And
And
again, for the
I
most
mean,
part,
no one likes paying a
yeah, of
bill, right? So we're talking about like
course.
large corporations and industries there. But if you're not staying on top of your ARR, hire someone that will, because
Yeah,
it will be to your benefit.
totally.
Find a fractional, find a group like Upsort. I'm sure you provide those, or like,
We
because
do. Of
sometimes it's just picking up
course.
the phone to be like, hey, you owe us money. And they're like, I'm so sorry. It's sitting on my desk. I forgot to pay it. And it's like, great.
Totally.
I can take it over make it easy. I can take it over the phone. Give me a credit card, whatever it is. Who cares? But get it in and have someone that's got a
Yeah.
responsibility to back it. Um,
Yeah, totally.
it's for the health of your business, right? So
Yeah, totally. All right. I think we got that one. That was great. All right, Caroline, I say we wrap it. Let's if you got anything in the there in the queue, let's just hold on to next time. Grant, thank you so much for joining. Really appreciate it. I thought this was a great one. So before we totally adjourn, Grant, obviously you are a multifaceted person. Where can folks who listen to your expertise and think like, I think Grant's great. I think what Parallax is doing is great. Obviously you guys put out great content. Where should people go to learn more about what's in your head, where it's in Parallax head, learn more about the tool? Where should we
yeah,
send
two
them?
places. Getparallax.com is a big place, and you can find us on LinkedIn too. All of our content is up there. We've got a great team there that helps us manage all of it. And what I would say too is, I mean, these questions that we're getting, they're coming up not because they've all been solved in perpetuity, right? They take work and effort, and having the right tools there to do that. And I'm a people first person, even from a leadership to an agency standpoint. And that's why I believe in Parallax. I mean, if I'm going to do like the pitch, right? The hardest part is, am I making the right hire? Am I bringing in the right person? That's this role and this company that I built is consuming so much of my time. I want the right people. Parallax will help you. And exactly to your point too, 2024 was tough, right? The sales cycle was longer. And sometimes it's not about putting your own personal risk if you're an owner or anything, or sometimes it's about understanding who that core team is. And sometimes there's talent that needs to be let go.
Yeah,
We want to help those, and so that it's not all peaks and valleys. We want to
totally.
try to smooth that out as much as possible. It takes effort, but we think we've got a great tool that does that. But it comes with other experts like Ryan and your team too. So
Yeah,
find me. Happy to
great
continue to
team.
chat. But yeah.
Awesome. Well, everybody, Thank you for joining. Thanks, Grant, for joining. We will be back here next month, as always, on the hot seat. And in the meantime, if you have any burning questions that we didn't answer, feel free to email Caroline at upsourceaccounting.com or me, R. Watson at upsourceaccounting.com with your questions, and we will answer them next time. In the meantime, have a happy holidays, and we'll see you soon.
Happy 2025.
That's right. Are we out?
All right, streams are off.
Yeah.
I am
All
Grant, I
right.
warned you that something was going to happen. So
Of course.